Imagine being a teenager, sitting in a courtroom, your whole future hanging by a thread, all because of a lie. That's exactly what happened to 17-year-old Marcus Taylor, a regular high school kid with dreams of making it out of his neighborhood. One night, everything changed. A cop accused him of a crime he didn't commit. No evidence, no witnesses, just the officer's word. And in a system that's supposed to be fair, Marcus quickly realized that sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as the story people choose to believe. The prosecution painted him as a criminal, twisting facts and feeding the jury a version of events designed to put him behind bars. His family sat in the courtroom, watching helplessly as the case unraveled. His mother, eyes filled with tears, gripped the armrest, praying for a miracle. And Marcus, he could barely breathe, knowing that a single guilty verdict could steal years of his life. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Marcus's defense team had been working behind the scenes, uncovering evidence that would shake the courtroom to its core, and when they finally revealed it, gasps echoed through the room. The judge, the jury, even the officer who started it all, couldn't hide their reactions. It was the kind of moment that changes everything. But what exactly did they find? How did a simple defense strategy turn the entire case upside down? And most importantly, would it be enough to set Marcus free? Stick around, because this story is far from over. Marcus could still hear the prosecutor's voice ringing in his ears, calling him a dangerous young man and a threat to the community. But he wasn't a criminal. He was just a kid who had been at the wrong place at the wrong time. The night everything fell apart, he had been walking home from a friend's house when flashing lights appeared out of nowhere. Before he could react, an officer was in his face, demanding answers to questions he didn't understand. "Where were you an hour ago? Who were you with? Don't lie to me." Marcus tried to explain, but it didn't matter. The officer had already made up his mind. A crime had been committed nearby, and Marcus fit the description: young, black, wearing a hoodie. That was all it took. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists before he even had a chance to process what was happening. The case against him wasn't built on solid evidence. It was built on assumptions. The officer's testimony was the only real thing tying him to the crime, and in the courtroom, that seemed to be enough. Witnesses who could have cleared his name weren't called to testify. Video footage that could have proven his innocence mysteriously wasn't available. The system was moving fast, and it felt like there was no way to stop it. But Marcus's defense team wasn't giving up. His lawyer, a sharp, determined woman named Lisa Carter, knew something didn't add up. She had spent weeks digging, questioning everything. And then, just days before the final verdict, she found something, a hidden crack in the prosecution's story. It was small, easy to miss, but powerful enough to change everything. The day she walked into court with her discovery, Marcus felt hope for the first time in weeks. But hope alone wasn't enough. Would the truth finally come to light, or was the system too far gone to listen? As Marcus sat in the courtroom, his hands clenched together under the table, he kept replaying that night in his mind. Every detail, every second. He knew he was innocent, but in that moment it didn't feel like the truth mattered. The prosecutor was confident, speaking as if Marcus's guilt was already decided. The jury watched, some with skeptical expressions, others looking like they had already made up their minds. Lisa Carter, his lawyer, had spent sleepless nights piecing together what had really happened. She wasn't just fighting for Marcus, she was fighting against a system that had failed too many times before, and she wasn't the only one who saw the cracks. A local journalist, David Reyes, had been sitting in the back of the courtroom every day, taking notes, watching how the case was unfolding. Something about it didn't sit right with him. He had covered trials before, but this one felt different. Outside the courtroom, Marcus's mother, Denise, was doing everything she could to spread the word. She talked to community leaders, she reached out to activists, anyone who would listen. She knew her son wasn't perfect, but she also knew he wasn't a criminal. The pain of watching him sit behind a defense table, labeled as something he wasn't, was unbearable. She wasn't just fighting for Marcus, she was fighting for every mother who had been in her place. And then there was the officer. The man who had pointed the finger at Marcus sat calmly on the witness stand, telling his version of events with certainty. He spoke with authority, like he had no doubt in his mind. But Lisa knew something he didn't. She had uncovered a piece of evidence that could expose the truth. The only question was, when the moment came, would the court believe it? Or would the system find a way to silence it before it ever had the chance? The air in the courtroom felt heavier as Lisa stood, gripping the evidence she had worked so hard to find. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Marcus sat frozen, his heart pounding as he watched her walk toward the judge. He knew whatever she was about to reveal could change everything. She took a slow breath before speaking. "Your Honor, new evidence has come to light. Evidence that directly contradicts the officer's testimony." A murmur swept through the courtroom. The prosecutor stiffened, the officer shifted in his seat, but Lisa kept her eyes locked on the judge. The officer claimed he identified Marcus at the scene of the crime. "But what if I told you that was impossible?" She reached into her briefcase, pulling out a document. "This is GPS data from Marcus's phone. It places him miles away at the exact time of the incident." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marcus's mother clutched her chest, hope flickering in her eyes. The jurors exchanged uncertain glances. The prosecutor immediately objected, scrambling to regain control. "We were never given this information. This is highly irregular." Lisa didn't flinch. "The reason you don't have it is because it was never included in the official report. Someone made sure it stayed buried." All eyes turned to the officer on the stand. His face had gone pale. David Reyes, the journalist, leaned forward in his seat. He had suspected something was off, but this was bigger than he imagined. The judge glanced at the evidence, his expression unreadable. "I'll allow it," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. The officer cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. I may have misremembered certain details," he muttered. But it was too late. The cracks in his story were wide open now. And as Lisa prepared her final blow, the entire courtroom knew. They were about to witness something unforgettable. For a brief moment, it seemed like the truth was finally coming to light. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Lisa pressed forward, sensing the officer's hesitation. She knew she had him cornered. But before she could deliver the final blow, the prosecutor stood up, a smirk creeping across his face. "Interesting," he said, flipping through his notes. "You claim this evidence was buried, but let's not forget, GPS data can be manipulated. Phone records can be misleading. And let's not ignore the fact that Marcus has a prior school suspension for fighting. Doesn't that speak to his character?" Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew where this was going. They weren't going to fight the facts. They were going to attack him. Lisa's expression remained calm, but Marcus could see the fire in her eyes. "A school suspension," she scoffed. "That has nothing to do with whether or not he committed this crime." But the damage had been done. The jury looked uneasy, as if the seed of doubt had been planted. And then, just when it seemed like the momentum was shifting again, David Reyes, the journalist, stood up from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, I have something that needs to be heard." The judge's eyes narrowed. "You're out of line, Mr. Reyes." David raised his hands. "I understand, but I have a recording. One that proves this officer didn't just misremember details. He knowingly lied." A stunned silence fell over the room. The officer's face darkened. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "What recording?" David hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "2 nights ago, I got a tip to check a police radio channel. I recorded everything. There's a conversation between this officer and someone higher up. And in that conversation, he admits Marcus wasn't the guy. But they decided to pin it on him anyway." Marcus's pulse raced. This was bigger than just one officer lying. It was something deeper. And if what David said was true, then Marcus wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was about to expose something no one was supposed to see. The entire courtroom was frozen. The judge leaned forward, eyes locked on David Reyes. "Play the recording," he ordered. David tapped his phone screen, and the room filled with a crackling voice. It was the officer, his voice unmistakable. Kid wasn't even there. "But we need a name, and this one fits. No one's gonna question it." A stunned silence followed. Marcus's mother covered her mouth, her body shaking. Lisa glanced at Marcus, then back at the judge, her hands tightening into fists. The officer's face had drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The prosecutor shot up. "This is inadmissible. We don't know the full context." Lisa cut him off. "The full context," she repeated, her voice sharp. "We just heard an officer admit that my client was framed. There is no context that makes that acceptable." The judge took a deep breath, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Officer," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" The officer licked his lips, gripping the stand. That recording is taken out of context," he tried, but his voice wavered. No one believed him. Then, in a shocking turn, another voice spoke up. "Your Honor." A man stood from the prosecution's side of the room. It was the lead investigator. "I wasn't aware of this, but I think we need to re-evaluate the case." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. "Order." He turned to Lisa. "Miss Carter, in light of this new evidence, I'm prepared to make a ruling." Lisa nodded. Marcus barely dared to breathe. The judge's next words changed everything. "The charges against Marcus Taylor are dismissed." Tears streamed down Marcus's mother's face. Lisa gripped his shoulder, whispering, "It's over." Or so they thought. As the officer was escorted out, David's phone buzzed with a new message. He glanced down, and his heart skipped a beat. "Asterisk, you're digging too deep. Stop now, asterisk." David looked up, realizing the truth. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Marcus stepped outside the courthouse, taking in a deep breath of fresh air. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't weighed down by fear. His mother pulled him into a tight hug, her body shaking with relief. Lisa stood beside them, exhaustion in her eyes, but also victory. The cameras were already rolling. Reporters shouted questions. "Marcus, how does it feel to be free? Do you have anything to say to the officer who accused you? What's next for you?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at Lisa. She gave him a small nod. He turned to the cameras, his voice steady but firm. "I should have never been here in the first place." A murmur swept through the crowd. He wasn't angry, just tired. "I lost weeks of my life over a lie, but I'm lucky. Some people never get their names cleared." He looked at David, who was staring at his phone, that strange message still lingering on his screen. The journalist's instincts told him this case was only the tip of something much bigger. There were still questions: who gave the order to frame Marcus? How many others had been caught in the same trap? And most importantly, who was trying to keep it all buried? But for now, the fight was over. Marcus was free. As he walked away with his mother and Lisa, the weight of what had almost happened still clung to him. He wasn't the same person who had walked into that courtroom. He had seen firsthand how close he came to losing everything. As they drove home, Marcus stared out the window, watching the city pass by. He wasn't sure what came next. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just his story, it was a warning, and it wasn't over yet.